December 16th, 1985, 1726, 46th Street, Midtown Manhattan. The sound of New York in December is a symphony of slush under tires and the rhythmic hiss of steam vents. But inside a black sedan parked near Sparks Steakhouse, the only sound is the heavy, synchronized breathing of four men in Russian fur hats. In their pockets, Berettas with filed-down firing pins. Across the street, Paul Castellano, the Pope of the Gambino family, steps out of his car. Crack. The first shot isn't like the movies. It's dry. It's clinical. Then a volley. White smoke mixes with the winter mist. Castellano hits the pavement, his blood blooming like a dark rose on his camel hair coat. A few blocks away, in another car, John Gotti watches through the glass. He doesn't smile, he just nods. The king is dead. Long live the king. Click. That was the sound of the old world breaking. For Gotti, this wasn't just a hit. It was a hostile takeover. But to understand how a man who thought he was untouchable ended up sending 19 soldiers to kill a single rival, and how the lone survivor turned the streets of New York into a graveyard, we have to go back to the moment the ego outgrew the throne. John Gotti didn't just want to lead the Gambinos, he wanted to be a deity. He wore $5,000 Brioni suits and walked with a strut that suggested he owned the gravity he moved through. But power in the mafia isn't a gift. It's a loan with a predatory interest rate. And in the shadows of the five families, one man wasn't buying the Dapper Don act. He was a relic of the old school, a silent operator named Frank the Ghost DiCicco. Gotti thought he had cleared the board. He thought the blood on 46th Street had washed away all opposition. He was wrong. The error wasn't in the ambition. It was in the assumption that no one was watching from the dark. The air grew colder. Someone was already counting the shells. January 12th, 1986, the Ravenite Social Club, Mulberry Street. The smell of espresso and stale cigar smoke permeated the wood-paneled walls of the Ravenite. This was Gotti's cathedral. Outside, the FBI sat in parked vans, shivering, recording every license plate. Inside, Gotti sat under a dim yellow light, surrounded by his inner circle. Paul was soft, Gotti whispered, leaning over a glass of sambuca. He was a businessman. This thing of ours? It's about respect. It's about the street. Salvatore Sammy the Bull Gravano nodded, but his eyes remained cold. Gravano was the muscle, the pragmatist. He knew that killing a boss without commission approval was a death sentence. The other families, the Genovese, the Lucchesi, were simmering. They didn't care about respect. They cared about the rules. 3 months earlier, the hierarchy was stable. Now the streets were a powder keg. Gotti began distributing territories like candy, rewarding loyalty over experience. He was building an army of cowboys, young hitters who liked the flash more than the silence. Among them was a group of 19 men, hand-picked for their ruthlessness. They were Gotti's sentinels. Their job was simple: eliminate any lingering loyalty to the old Castellano regime. The first name on the list was Thomas Bellotti's brother, but the second was the real prize. A man who knew where the money was buried and who had refused to toast to Gotti's new title. He was a captain who operated out of a quiet social club in Brooklyn, a man who believed Gotti was a clown in a suit. Gotti leaned back, his diamond ring catching the light. I want him gone. I want it to be a message. 19 men. Overkill? No. I want the city to feel the weight of it. But as the 19 men checked their weapons, the target was already moving into a basement that didn't exist on any map. February 4th, 1986, 0315, 18th Avenue, Brooklyn. The target was Angelo the Monk Vacca. He was a man of routines. He ate at the same diner, walked the same 2 blocks, and checked his rearview mirror every 30 seconds. Vacca wasn't a loud man, but he was a lethal one. He had served under Castellano for 30 years and viewed Gotti as a flashy virus. The 19 men assigned to the hit were split into 3 teams. Team Alpha was the primary shooters, Team Bravo was the backup, Team Charlie was the cleaners. They moved with the arrogance of men backed by a king. They didn't realize that Brooklyn in the 80s was a labyrinth, and Vacca knew every brick. The night of the planned ambush, a heavy rain turned the streets into a mirror. The 19 men converged on Vaca's quiet suburban home. They moved through the backyard, boots splashing in the mud. The lead shooter, a hothead named Joey Vines Vincenza, signaled the breach. "On 3, Joey mouthed. They kicked the door. They flooded the hallways. They sprayed the master bedroom with submachine gun fire, the staccato rhythm shattering the silence of the neighborhood. Pillows exploded in feathers. The mattress was shredded. But when the smoke cleared, the bed was empty. A single note sat on the nightstand, weighted down by a gold pinky ring, the one Gotti had gifted Vaca a year prior. It read, "You dress better than you hunt." Suddenly, the house didn't feel like a trap for Vaca. It felt like a tomb for the 19. A low whistle echoed from the vents. Then the smell of gasoline hit them. Vaca hadn't just left. He had prepared a welcome. The floorboards groaned. The hunters realized they were standing on a fuse. February 4th, 1986, 03:22. The Vaca residence. The explosion didn't level the house, but it blew out the windows and sent a wave of heat that scorched the lungs of the men inside. In the chaos, the 19 sentinels scrambled for the exits. This wasn't a hit anymore, it was a retreat. As they poured out into the rain, the shadows began to bite. Vaca wasn't alone. He had 3 zips, Sicilian mercenaries, positioned in the darkened houses across the street. These weren't Gotti's loudmouth street kids. These were professionals who grew up in the hills of Corleone. Thwip, thwip. Silenced shots picked off the first 2 men as they reached their cars. Joey Vines saw his best friend's head snap back before he even heard the report. "Ambush, it's a setup!" Joey screamed. The 19 men, supposed to be an elite strike force, broke rank. They began shooting blindly at shadows, at parked cars, at the very rain itself. It was a massacre of incompetence versus surgical precision. One by one, Gotti's men fell in the slush. Some tried to surrender, kneeling in the street. They were silenced without a word. By 04:00 a.m., the street was a graveyard of Brioni leather and cheap ego. 18 men lay dead or dying in the Brooklyn gutters. Only one man, a young getaway driver named Mickey Russo, managed to crawl into a sewer pipe, his shoulder shattered by a .45 slug. He watched through the iron grate as a pair of polished black shoes stopped inches from his face. Vaca stood there, lighting a cigarette in the rain. He didn't look for the survivor. He knew one was needed to carry the message. He blew a cloud of smoke into the cold air and walked away. Mickey Russo was the only one left to tell Gotti that the war hadn't ended. It had just become personal. February 5th, 1986, 06 Scam. A payphone near Coney Island. Mickey Russo's breath came in ragged, bloody bursts. He held the phone with a hand that wouldn't stop shaking. His eyes were wide, staring at the sunrise that felt like an insult. He had spent 4 hours crawling through the filth of New York's underbelly to reach this booth. He dialed the private number for the Ravenite. "Yeah?" a gravelly voice answered. It was Sammy Gravano. "They're all dead, Sammy," Mickey sobbed. "Everyone, Joey, Paulie, the kids. They're all gone. Vaca." He knew. He was waiting. There was a long silence on the other end, the sound of a heavy sigh. "Where are you, Mickey?" "I'm at the pier. I need a doctor, Sammy. I'm leaking bad." "Stay there," Gravano said. "We're sending someone." Mickey hung up and slumped against the glass. He thought he was being rescued. He didn't understand the physics of the mafia. In Gotti's world, a survivor of a failed hit isn't a witness. He's an embarrassment. He's a walking reminder that the boss made a mistake. 10 minutes later, a car pulled up. It wasn't an ambulance. It was 2 of Gotti's cleaners. Mickey saw them and felt a brief surge of hope until he saw the look in their eyes. It wasn't sympathy. It was a chore. "John wants to know," one of them said, leaning into the booth. "Did Vaca say anything?" Mickey nodded, coughing up dark fluid. He said the deadline is Friday. He said Gotti has until Friday to step down, or he brings the commission to the front door." The cleaner nodded. "Thanks, Mickey. You did good." The cleaner reached for his belt. Mickey realized too late that the deadline applied to him first. February 7th, 1986, Gotti's penthouse, Manhattan. The news of the 18 dead soldiers hit the tabloids like a sledgehammer. The headlines called it the Brooklyn butchery. To the public, it looked like a gang war. To the 5 families, it looked like Gotti had lost control of his own backyard. Gotti paced the room, his face a mask of fury. He had spent millions on his image, and in one night, a relic like Vaca had turned him into a laughingstock. The FBI was tightening the noose, emboldened by the chaos. "I want Vaca's head on a plate by midnight," Gotti roared, slamming his fist into a mahogany table. "John, listen," Gravano said, his voice low and dangerous. "The other families, they're talking. Genovese doesn't like the noise. You sent 19 guys and lost 18. It makes us look weak. It makes you look weak." Gotti turned on his underboss. "I am the boss of the Gambinos. I don't care what Fat Tony thinks. I don't care about the commission." This was the moment that Teflon Don started to peel. He was making decisions based on bruised ego rather than cold strategy. He ordered a lockdown of all Gambino social clubs. He stopped the flow of money to the streets to fund a private security detail for himself. The soldiers, the men who actually made the money, started to grumble. They were losing points because the boss was scared of a ghost. And in the underworld, when the soldiers stop getting paid, their loyalty starts to wander. Vaca's deadline was looming. It wasn't just a threat of violence, it was a threat of exposure. Vaca had files, ledgers from the Castellano era that linked Gotti to murders the FBI hadn't even dreamed of. The clock was ticking. Gotti thought he was the hunter, but he was starting to feel the walls closing in. February 10th, 1986. A darkened church in Queens. The air was thick with the scent of beeswax and old wood. Angelo Vaca sat in the back pew, his hat pulled low. He wasn't praying. He was waiting. A figure approached and sat 2 pews behind him. It was a man from Gotti's own inner circle, a man who had seen the 18 bodies in the snow and decided he didn't want to be the 19th. "He's unhinged," the man whispered. "He's talking about hitting a Genovese captain next. He's going to bring the whole Fed's army down on us." Vaca didn't turn around. "Gotti is a fire. Fires are bright, but they burn out. I need the location of the safe house." "He's moved to the hotel, 24-hour security. You can't get to him." "I don't need to get to him," Vaca replied. "I need his books, the real ones, the ones he keeps in the Ravenite basement." The informant hesitated. Betraying Gotti was one thing. Handing over the family's financial soul was another. "If he finds out—" "He won't," Vaca interrupted. "Because by the time he realizes they're gone, the commission will have already voted. He violated the rules. He killed a boss without a vote. He's a dead man walking. I'm just the one providing the gallows." The informant slid a key and a map across the wood. Vaca took them, his fingers steady. This was the chess match Gotti didn't know he was playing. While Gotti was looking for a fight in the streets, Vaca was dismantling his legitimacy from the inside. The effetto lenda, the legend of the survivor, was growing. People were saying Vaca couldn't be killed, that he was a judgment sent by the old gods of the mafia. Gotti was surrounded by guards, but he had never been more alone. February 12th, 1986, 22 wards, outside the Ravenite. Gotti decided to show his face. He wanted to prove he wasn't afraid. He arrived at the Ravenite in a motorcade, stepping out with a smirk for the cameras. He didn't see the silent figures moving through the alleyways behind the club. Vaca had used the informant's key. He wasn't there to kill Gotti, not yet. He was there to gut him. As Gotti held court upstairs, Vaca and 2 men were in the basement, loading boxes of ledgers and recorded tapes into a nondescript laundry van. Suddenly a floorboard creaked above them. A guard had come down for a bottle of wine. "Who's there?" the guard called out, reaching for his holster. Thud. Vaca's man hit him with a lead pipe before he could scream. They dragged the body behind a boiler. Upstairs, Gotti was laughing, regaling his followers with stories of his invincibility. He didn't hear the van pull away. He didn't know that his entire life's work, every bribe, every hit, every cent of stolen tax, was currently driving toward a meeting with the heads of the other 4 families. When the guard didn't return, Gotti's smile faded. He sent Sammy Gravano down to check. A minute later, Gravano returned, his face pale. "The safe is open, John. The books, they're gone." The room went silent. The music stopped. The Teflon had finally cracked wide open. Gotti realized the one who survived hadn't just escaped, he had won. The deadline wasn't a day, it was an ending. February 14, 1985, an undisclosed location, Staten Island. The heads of the Genovese, Lucchese, Bonanno, and Colombo families sat around a heavy oak table. In the center lay the ledgers Vacca had recovered. These books didn't just implicate Gotti. They showed he had been skimming from the other family's construction rackets. Angelo Vacca stood at the head of the table. He looked tired, but his eyes were sharp. "John Gotti is a loudmouth who brings heat," Vacca said. "He killed Paul without your leave. He tried to kill me and lost 18 of his own men in a residential neighborhood. He is a liability to the business." The bosses whispered among themselves. The rules were the only thing that kept them from total war with the government. Gotti was a circus, and the circus was attracting the FBI's top performers. "What do you propose, Angelo?" the Genovese boss asked. "Let the feds have him," Vacca said. "We withdraw our protection. We leak the location of the witnesses he's been hiding. We let the Teflon wear off in a courtroom. And then we reorganize the Gambinos under someone quieter." The vote was unanimous. Gotti, sitting in his fortified hotel room, felt the shift in the atmosphere. The phone stopped ringing. His sentinels started making excuses to leave. The air felt thin. He was still the boss, but he was a boss of an empty room. He looked out the window at the New York skyline, the city he thought he had conquered. He realized that in the mafia, you don't lose all at once. You lose one friend, one rule, one secret at a time, until the only thing left is the sound of the handcuffs. April 2, 1992, Federal Court, Brooklyn. The trial was a media circus, exactly as Gotti wanted, but for all the wrong reasons. Sammy the Bull Gravano was on the stand, pointing a finger at his former friend. The Teflon was gone. The jury didn't see a hero, they saw a murderer who couldn't even control his own men. Gotti was sentenced to life without parole. As he was led away in his last Brioni suit, he scanned the gallery. In the very back row, almost invisible in the shadows, sat an old man in a grey overcoat. It was Angelo Vacca. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second. No words were exchanged. Vacca simply adjusted his hat and walked out of the courtroom, disappearing into the New York crowd. He was the one who survived. He was the one who delivered the deadline. Gotti spent the rest of his days in a 689 cell in Marion, Illinois. The effecto lenda remained, but not as he intended. People didn't talk about his suits or his swagger. They talked about the 19 men he sent to do a job that ended his empire. They talked about the night the snow turned red in Brooklyn. Power is a shadow on the wall. Gotti thought he was the sun, but he was just another man standing in the way of the light. In the end, the streets always win. They have more time than you do. They have more ghosts. Would you have traded the loyalty of your men for the fame of the Teflon Don? Or is silence the only true currency of power? Let us know in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more deep dives into the dark history of the criminal underworld.